If you're chasing the right life, I did too. And it cost me almost everything. In the next 10 minutes, I'll share with you what it took me more than 30 years to understand. So you don't have to learn the hard way. Because for most of my life, I believed something very simple, that if I made the right choices, if I worked hard enough, if I became a good enough person, life would eventually reward me. I believed that if I followed the right path, things would work out. But life doesn't always work out that way. And it took losing almost everything for me to understand what actually matters. At 41, I thought that my life was taking off and I was on top of the world. I was recently married, I was pregnant, and everything, all that I had imagined was coming together. And then one morning, I woke up and something was different. And I didn't know it then, but my life was about to change in ways that I couldn't have imagined. But before we go there, I think I need to give you some context. I grew up in Venezuela. And as a little girl, I had big dreams. I wanted to leave Venezuela. I wanted to travel the world. I was hungry. And, maybe if I'm really honest, I think I, I just didn't want to become my mother. But I left Venezuela actually as a fashion model. And I, again, I had this very simple belief that if I worked hard, then I would accomplish what I wanted. I would make things happen. And, modeling had its clear rules. You needed to look a certain way. And I followed those rules. And then as I, moved on, I thought, well, the same thing applies. You meet somebody, you get married, you build a life, you build a family, and that things will happen if you check the box, if you do the right things, almost like karma. If you are a good student, if you're a good person, then life would reward me with the things that I wanted. But I think life had other plans. And if I think about it, though, if I look back, I think I achieved many things that I wanted. I traveled, I lived internationally, I learned different languages. My world definitely expanded beyond my imagination. And I was like a world citizen. But I think that also came at a cost. That independence came at a cost. And I was very independent and I very determined and I pushed and I very, maybe very self-willed that if and I worked hard in those days. This was back in the 90s and early 2000s. And, you would get on the plane, get there, different time zone. And I pushed my body to certain extremes and maybe even my emotional body or my emotions to an extreme that I just had to do it. And again, it was great. I created many things and it also came at a cost where I wasn't really building community as I was traveling the world and I was, yeah, building maybe financial stability and I was building a brand. I I didn't have roots. I wasn't really rooted. And if you think about it, then I didn't get the lesson or the lesson that what supported me. It really supported me wasn't just my pushing and my will, but it was actually everything around me. I mean, we take so much for granted. If you think about it, you open the faucet to brush your teeth and that water comes from somewhere and somebody somewhere is managing that water gets to your faucet. And that's, like foundational. And it's so easy to take for granted. And in some ways, I was living like an island, thinking, that I was self-sufficient. But I think as human beings, we are social beings. We depend on communities. We are designed to live in connection. And life just reminded me of that. So I think one of the first big collapses in my life was divorce. And for many of us, it's such a disruptor, such a loss of identity. But by then I had stopped modeling and I was so deeply intertwined with this person. So it was such a loss of relationship. I was starting to build that community that I talked about. It loss of financial stability. and that perhaps the loss of what to do next. Because in my mind, well, I was going to have a family, I was going to have kids, I was going to become a mom, maybe work locally in the community, and that was such a deconstructing time in my life. But life would then have yet more lessons for me to learn. One night, after the divorce, I had moved to a different town, and I was laying on the floor of my bedroom. Yeah, I didn't know what to do. And so I was laying there on the floor, and I realized that I didn't even know. It's almost like my body needed to remember how to breathe again. I don't know if you can relate to that, but it's such a disorientation that I thought, I'm laying there and it's like, I don't know how to live, but I don't even know how to breathe anymore. And so I just laid there, maybe at some level thinking like I'm just dying, right? I can't breathe. But but then as I relaxed and I laid there, something else happened, right? It was one understanding a foundational support that as I was falling, I wasn't holding myself up. There was something of the ground of the floor that was holding me. And again, now I'm reflecting on it and it sounds so insightful, but it was at a very visceral level that I was laying there and I thought, well, I'm falling, but there's a ground. And then I realized that even when I don't know how to breathe, I just kept breathing. Like my body knows how to breathe. And I think the lesson in that moment is that even when I thought that everything was lost, or when I really didn't know what came next, it's a feeling, it's a sensation that life continues. And something of that gave me a sense of forward movement, even if I didn't know where I was going or where my life was going next. So a few years later, I remarried and I got pregnant. And for the first time, I thought, things were building again. I had not only learned how to breathe, I still had some modeling jobs happening, and I had found love again. And we were making a family. So that was so exciting. But then at 12 weeks, I woke up that morning and I felt like it, it was a knowing that something wasn't right. And when we went to the doctor, it was confirmed that the baby had no heartbeat. It was like an atomic bomb. Like you imagine like my whole world flattened. And not only my whole world here, but into the future. Everything that I imagined, all the dreams and everything that I thought was true, it was like nothing, nada. In Spanish, like nada. It's just like just all nothing around. And I had that feeling again of not knowing how to live anymore and needing to fall so deep into the grief, into the loss. I could I was so I couldn't coach anymore. Like how was I going to offer listening or stability to anybody when I didn't have a center, or how could I stand in front of a camera where I didn't know what face to show and I only really had grief. So in so something of that memory of needing to, not knowing how to breathe got to the bottom of my being. And I remembered again how life had a way of continuing without me needing to know where it's going, without even me needing to hold it all together. And maybe even allow me to fall completely and to feel the grief of my loss of the baby, and then eventually a deeper loss because we tried IVF for a year and without any success. So it was even confronting the fact that I was not going to be a biological mom in this lifetime. And and maybe those of you that have gone through such grief and loss, it's hard to take care of oneself. I was eating, I wasn't working out, or not even working out. I wasn't taking care of myself, and so I gained weight. My blood sugar was up. The stress of everything that was going. My health was declining. Also, the marriage, we were recently married, but the marriage was strained, and it was it. I felt I was losing everything. But that loss actually helped me to confront something deeper and more important. And it was that my happiness in my life usually dependent on external circumstances. My life needed to be going well for me to feel well. So like my body healthy in a certain way, and my relationships in a good way, and my career and my financial stability. But I guess the main question, or the lesson to be learned was that what happens, or where is that stability when the external conditions aren't there? So a different kind of stability started to happen, like a well-being that wasn't conditional. And in that realization, something unexpected happened, because there was like an unconditional well-being, something deeper in me that was more stable, that didn't depend on the ebbs and flows of my life, of things going well and things not going well. And that realization changed everything. So I think what's important to know, to challenge, is that society has us believe that happiness comes from that external achievement, or from having, or from being a certain way. But what I discovered, it was something different. That that peace, that stability, didn't come from chasing externals. It's actually, when I almost lost everything, it was something more subtle and more constant and deeper, in that was fundamental of my being, and it wasn't something that anyone could give me or could take away. When you stop measuring yourself to those external standards, when you stop believing that happiness is something that you earn, well-being becomes something more subtle, deeper. And it's like being present with life as it is. So today I look at my life very differently. My priorities have changed. When I was chasing dreams, and maybe at the cost of community, now I invest more in relationships, in trust, in collaboration, in building things together that builds resilience in my own life, but also resilience in the relationships, in the things that nurture that well-being, that foundational well-being. So instead of forcing my life to match the plans that I have, I actually meet life and see what life is bringing me, and in some ways, like, work with that, and and it becomes more creative. Maybe not what I planned, but it actually ends up being more interesting. Like, I was thinking the other day, if I'm planning a picnic, and then I wake up the next day and it's raining, sure, I can think that, my plans were ruined because it's raining. But then if I blend with that, if I work with that, and I guess maybe they say, like, in every no, there's a yes after every no, behind every no. Then it's like, well, what's there? And so then I was thinking, well, if it would be raining, probably be a wonderful afternoon to drink tea with a friend by the fireplace or something like that. But it's that I think I've shifted that push, that efforting in my idea, and now I'm moving with what's possible, and then in that, create living a life that is beyond my dreams. And perhaps these are lessons that are easy for me to say when I'm 50. So if you're younger, if you're in your 20s and your 30s, of course, it's natural to feel like you're on top of the world, that you have all the time in the world, and rightly so. I guess what I would want to tell you is to also look at the big picture. Time is of the essence, and there are certain stages and certain times in your life where you need to attend to certain things. So, think about community, think about relationships, think about what nurtures you. And then if you're like me, past a certain age, I think it's still important to take a pause and think of what is that foundational um, stability that does not depend on conditions. Think about those moments where you've been stuck or you've been down. If you go quiet enough, it's almost like when you're drowning, they say float, because if you keep flapping and flapping and flapping, actually you drown faster. And it's when you relax, the buoyancy of your body would actually help you float. I think loss maybe can be um, navigated in that way, that in that relaxing, in not efforting and not pushing, but actually relaxing, you'll find the natural buoyancy of that innate well-being, even when it's hard, when the loss is real and it's there. And if you're in the middle of a loss right now, again, I don't want to minimize it. I want to acknowledge it. Just take a pause, take a deep breath, relax, maybe wherever it's possible to relax. And going back to how it's hard to acknowledge what supports us. And so in all the falling, when you look around the room, what is there that it is supporting you, that it is still there? And I guess find comfort or find solace in what is in you meeting life where it is right now. And if this message is resonating with you, go ahead and like the video so this message reaches people like you who need to be reminded that you're not alone, that we can relax and receive our loss, but also feel how life continues, feel how our body knows how to take the next breath, how and the world around us supports us. And if you want someone to talk to you and to help you through this process, find a link in the description for a private call. I would love to chat with you and see where I can support you, because sometimes losing everything can be the beginning of discovering what truly matters.